up? Keller Williams Realty Partners coming to you with another educational video. Video 3 of the seller's point of view. This will be about the appraisal. And again, I'm going to read through this just like I have been and tell you a little bit of my experience, and we'll go from there. The appraisal. If one is required, the appraisal will be scheduled soon. Two things about that. From time to time, you will get what's called an appraisal waiver. Those are a little bit more rare these days, but depending on the neighborhood, depending on the amount of money put down, depending on the buyer's credit and this and that, sometimes an appraisal waiver will, the lender will issue that, so they don't have to pay for an appraisal and we don't have to worry about the value. As far as it being scheduled soon, to the extent that the seller is able, we need to try to be as accommodating as we can to the appraiser. I have seen this backfire on people. Now, it doesn't happen much, but I have seen an appraiser get mad and value a home, I think, below what they should have, I believe because they were upset with the appraiser. Now, again, this is incredibly rare, but these are human beings as well, and we need to make sure that we try to accommodate them. We are selling a home here, and it's very inconvenient at times. And again, to the extent that we're able, we need to let the appraiser come out when they're asking. They don't ask to come out at 10 o'clock on Sunday night. That's not what I'm talking about. But they will ask to come out at 2 p.m. Eastern on, Monday. Again, we should try to accommodate that. I will let you know when they plan to come out. They are supposed to check this with the listing agent first. Sometimes they will just come out. Sometimes they will appraise the house from the car. I've seen that. But most of the time they will reach out to you and get permission to come out. If the appraisal and back to the reading, if the appraisal comes in below the purchase price, the only way to continue the transaction will be for you, the seller, to lower the price, or for the buyer to make up the difference in cash, or for the buyer and the seller to meet somewhere in the middle. I will talk about when we can dispute some of these appraisals, but I can just tell you from time to time that does happen and you're able to win, but it is very rare. Usually the appraiser's word is final on the value of the home. Now, again, going back to this, in this market today, as we talk from July 1st, 2026, very few buyers either have the funds or are willing to bring the additional funds to make up the difference. So, for example, if a home is under contract for $500,000 and the appraisal comes in at $475,000, the only way to fix that, unless you can dispute it and win, which is rare, the only way you can win that or keep the deal together is for the buyer to make up the $25,000 difference, the seller to eat it all and lower the price, or for them to meet somewhere in the middle. I've done all of those, all four of those scenarios you just mentioned. If no deal is worked out, the buyer gets a full earnest money refund, again, provided this takes place before the appraisal contingency, and the house will go back on the market. I like to tell my sellers this: I can never predict, and going back to the reading, I can never predict what value an appraiser will come back with. I can tell you that most of them that I've looked at are very sound and very professional, and most of them come back with a reasonable value, okay? But from time to time, they'll mess up, or from time to time, we might have gotten it wrong as a listing agent and a seller, okay? FYI, if the appraisal comes back at or above the purchase price, the buyer is not required to share the appraisal or the value with us. And from time to time, the seller is always very curious. Hey, what did it appraise at? I always like to ask the buyer's agent. They are perfectly within their rights to tell you that they're not going to share that with you. I believe in the long term it's because they might view it as a bit of a negotiation tactic, where they realize that, hey, if the value was $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 over, you might be able to use that as a bargaining chip later on, so a lot of times they don't share it. But the truth of the matter is, it is the buyer's appraisal and they don't have to share it. As I always do, I will communicate with the appraiser and send him or her comparable properties that shed the best possible light on the home. Sometimes we overlist a property. In that case, what I'm going to try to do is send the best comparables I possibly can to the appraiser. Now, what happens a lot of the times is, in fact, I think it's only not happened once, is the appraiser is perfectly willing to have you send them some comparables. They do not have to use those. They can completely ignore you. Okay. I have only had one appraiser tell me to not send him comparables. Most of them are happy to do that. Some appraisers are willing to listen to me, but others are not. All appraisers will measure the square footage of your home. I have seen the results come in lower than what the tax records indicate, or lower than what the seller previously thought. I've seen those be off as much as 25 or 30% before. The tax record said the house was 2,800 square feet, and it turns out it was only 2,300. That does happen, and sometimes that really does hurt the value. So they need to be prepared for that. The seller might think that the house is bigger than what it is. Again, the tax records are often wrong, so be aware of that on the square footage. And again, like it says here, this can cause a valuation problem. Many times, the appraiser's word on value is final. Not every time, but a lot of the times. I have had one that I was able to dispute, and we had to get but one thing you have to keep in mind is the buyer has to be willing to dispute it with you. They may get an appraisal that's low, and they may want to try to ride with it and get the seller to lower the price. I had this one situation on a VA loan where the appraisal came back ridiculously low. It was clear that the appraiser did something wrong. Wouldn't go back and look at it, and I worked with the buyer's agent to fix it because it was, and we got really lucky because it was in a fairly new neighborhood where the houses were almost exactly the same, and we were able to prove that the value that the appraiser gave was wrong. Again, if the numbers are all over the place, you've got a bunch of variations in homes. Sometimes it is very, very difficult to dispute an appraisal. As with all things, or let me go back, many times the appraiser's word is final. I just read that. The value comes in low, the deal is killed if the seller will not reduce the price. That's just a fact. That's how it happens. The seller does not have to reduce the price, but the buyer certainly, as long as he or she is within their appraisal contingency period, doesn't have to bring the extra money to closing unless they just really want the house. As with all things, we will cross that bridge when and if we get there. Here's another point that's important to talk about. The appraisal for government-insured loans like VA, FHA, and USDA, and of those three, FHA is going to be the most common. Those come with an extra degree of scrutiny for soundness and safety. Okay, so for example, if you have a deck rail where the pillars are too far apart, they'll write that up and say that has to be fixed before you close. If there aren't rails on certain stairways, they'll write that up. I've actually seen them write up that you had to put downspout extensions on the side of the house and run the water away from the house before they would close. I'm just telling you from my experience, I think it does depend on the mood of the appraiser that day. I have seen them ask for downspout extensions, but the back porch or the back deck was out of plumb or off level by almost a foot, and they didn't say anything. So, we could give buyers and sellers a list of things that they're looking for, but oftentimes it just depends on what the appraiser writes up that day. A lot of times they'll write up things like smoke detectors. I've seen them write up things for foggy windows where the seals on a window get broken and then they get gas in there. So it just depends. But again, FHA, VA, and USDA, those do come with an extra degree of safety and soundness, and those issues will have to be taken care of before you can close sometimes. In addition to that, one more thing, I've seen paint become an issue a lot more lately. Rotten wood become an issue much more lately, and even sometimes on conventional loans. Sometimes this is even the case on conventional loans. If the appraiser comes back with items that need to be fixed, they will have to be completed before the loan can close. Now, sometimes they'll allow you to take a photo and send it to them and they'll take your word for it. Sometimes they have to come back out and actually visibly see it. They're going to charge the buyer $150, and it just depends on what the appraiser is willing to do and willing not to do. But if they write up findings in that have to be fixed, they have to be fixed before the loan can close. Excuse me. The appraiser will have to come back out and verify the repairs. Hopefully, if there are any issues, we can work them out quickly. Okay, and that concludes concludes this video about the appraisal. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the financing contingency, and we're going to talk about closing. Thanks for watching.